The year was 1802. Virginia stood quiet under the weight of its plantations, vast lands, white columns, polished wooden floors, and beneath all that beauty, a system built on pain, silence, and stolen lives. This was an America where freedom had a color, and if you were born without it, your life was decided before you could even cry. Inside one of Virginia's grand plantation homes, a plantation owner's wife lay exhausted in her bed. Hours of labor had passed. Sweat clung to her skin. Doctors whispered. Candles flickered against the walls. What happened next should have been remembered as a miracle. She gave birth to triplets, 3 babies, 3 new lives. But joy did not last long. 2 of the babies were placed gently beside her. Their skin was pale, their features unmistakably white. Relief spread across the room. Then came the 3rd child. The moment the baby was revealed, the air shifted. Silence fell. The child's skin was dark, not slightly tanned, not shadowed by candlelight. Dark enough to destroy reputations, dark enough to expose secrets, dark enough to end lives. In 1802 Virginia, a dark-skinned baby born inside a white plantation home meant only one thing, a truth that could never be spoken. Questions would come. Who was the father? Was the plantation owner involved? Was the child born of violence, coercion, or shame? And worst of all, what would society say? In that world, public honor mattered more than human life. The plantation wife looked at the child in horror, not because the baby was unwanted, but because the baby was dangerous. Dangerous to her image, dangerous to her marriage, dangerous to the entire lie the plantation depended on. Outside that bedroom, hundreds of enslaved people worked the land. Men, women, children, treated as property, bought, sold, punished. And now, one of them was about to be given a task that history would never write down. An enslaved woman was summoned. Her name is lost to time. No records, no portraits, but her story lives in moments like this. She had raised other people's children before, fed them, bathed them, loved them, knowing they would never call her mother. The plantation wife handed her the baby, and then came the order. No witnesses, no paperwork, no mercy. Take the child, hide him. Those words were not a request, they were a sentence. To hide a child in 1802 did not mean secrecy alone. It meant erasing his identity, stripping him of family, condemning him to slavery for life. This baby, born inside luxury, was now destined for the slave quarters. The enslaved woman held the child carefully. She understood immediately. This baby would never know his true mother, never inherit his father's name, never sit at the table he was born beside. His skin had sealed his fate. Outside the plantation house, life continued as if nothing had happened. The 2 white babies would be celebrated, dressed in fine cloth, raised as heirs. The 3rd child would vanish. This was not rare. American plantations were filled with hidden bloodlines. Children born from violence, from exploitation, from power abused behind closed doors. They were living evidence of a system that claimed superiority while committing unimaginable cruelty. The enslaved woman walked toward the slave quarters, each step heavier than the last. She knew what awaited this child: forced labor, whippings, hunger, silence. And yet, she also knew something else. If she did not protect him, no one would. In the slave quarters, the baby was given no name, at least not officially. Names were dangerous. Names meant humanity, and humanity was forbidden. This child would grow up watching others sold away, watching mothers scream, watching fathers disappear, all while living only steps away from the house where he was born. This was America, a land built on freedom that refused to give it to those who built it. The plantation wife returned to her life. Society praised her motherhood. Visitors admired her children. No one asked about the 3rd baby, and no one dared to. But history remembers, even when records do not, because every hidden child leaves a mark, not on paper, but in blood, pain, and memory. This is not just one story, it is the story of thousands. Children erased because they didn't fit the lie. And yet, every lie cracks eventually. Every secret leaves traces. And every child hidden in darkness carries a truth too heavy to bury forever.
The enslaved woman never spoke of that night. She couldn't. Words were dangerous on plantations. Silence was survival. But every time she looked down at the child in her arms, she knew she was holding more than a baby. She was holding a secret powerful enough to kill her. The slave quarters sat just beyond the grand house, close enough to see its lights at night, far enough to remind everyone where they belonged. Wooden shacks, dirt floors, cold winters, burning summers. This was where the child would grow up, not as a son, not as an heir, but as property. The woman wrapped the baby in worn cloth. She whispered to him, not his name, because names could be overheard, but prayers, prayers for strength, prayers for survival, prayers that one day this child would understand why he was hidden. On plantations, children learned quickly. They learned when to look down, when not to speak, when pain was coming. By the age of 5, this child would be expected to work, not because he was ready, but because slavery did not care. As the years passed, the child grew. His skin marked him. His features carried the truth everyone pretended not to see. Some enslaved people whispered among themselves. They knew. They always knew. Children like him existed everywhere on plantations, living proof of violence disguised as tradition. The plantation owner never acknowledged the child, but he noticed him, from the porch, from the fields, from a distance that protected his reputation. Every look carried the same message: you should not exist. The plantation wife avoided the slave quarters entirely. She had gotten what she wanted, the lie preserved. In society's eyes, she was a respectable mother of 2. History rarely asks what respectability costs others. As the boy grew older, he began to understand something was different. He noticed how he was watched more closely, punished more harshly, corrected more violently. He learned early that his body was a reminder the plantation wanted erased. The enslaved woman did what she could. She taught him small acts of resistance, how to keep his head down, how to survive beatings, how to hide intelligence, because intelligence frightened masters. A smart enslaved child was a threat. At night, when the fields were quiet, she told him stories, stories of Africa, not places she had seen, but places passed down through broken memory. Stories of people who were free, who chose their own names, who owned their own lives. Stories slavery tried to kill. But morning always came, and with it, labor. The boy was sent to the fields, sunrise to sunset, bare feet, bleeding hands, and always the plantation house in the distance, the place where his life had begun and been rejected. Sometimes he saw the other children, the white children, well-dressed, laughing, protected, children who shared his blood, but never his fate. He didn't know why yet, but he felt it. On plantations, truth was never explained. It was absorbed through pain. By his teenage years, the boy was strong, too strong. Strength frightened overseers, so they tried to break him. Extra work, public punishments, isolation. The goal was always the same: destroy the spirit before it grows dangerous. The enslaved woman aged quickly. Slavery steals years from bodies. Her hands shook more, her back bent lower. But she watched the boy constantly, afraid that one mistake would get him sold, beaten, or killed. Then came the moment she had always feared. The plantation owner noticed the boy's resemblance, the same eyes, the same jawline, too close to deny. One night, the woman was summoned. This time, the order was colder. The boy was becoming a problem. Problems were removed, sold south, worked to death, or worse. The woman understood. This was the end of what little protection she had given him. She returned to the slave quarters that night, knowing she might never see him again. She sat beside him, and for the first time, she told him the truth. Not everything, but enough. She told him, "You were born in that house." She did not say whose blood ran through him. She didn't need to. He understood. Truth is heavy, especially when you realize your life was stolen before it began. The next morning, the boy was gone, sold, his name, if he ever had one, erased. Another body added to America's wealth, another truth buried under profit. The plantation continued, cotton grew, money flowed, the lie survived. But history does not forget easily, because every hidden child leaves descendants, stories whispered, memories passed down, pain inherited. This story is not unique. It is American. It is the foundation of Black history in this country, built from silence, survival, and stolen bloodlines.
The boy disappeared. No farewell, no record, no grave, just another name erased from plantation memory. But what happened to him was not an exception, it was a pattern. Across early America, especially in the South, plantations were not just centers of agriculture, they were factories of silence, places where wealth was built by hiding the truth in plain sight. By the early 1800s, enslaved women were not only forced laborers, they were also victims of systematic sexual violence. This truth rarely appears in textbooks, but it lived in the bodies of their children. Children born lighter, children born darker, children whose existence contradicted the lie that slavery was orderly or moral. These children were walking evidence that the system was rotten, so the system did what it always does: it erased them. Some were sold south to sugar plantations, where survival rates were low. Some were given false parentage. Some were killed quietly. And some, like the boy from Virginia, were hidden in plain sight until they became inconvenient. Plantation owners understood one thing very clearly: control the narrative, or the narrative will destroy you. American society pretended not to see. Churches preached obedience. Politicians wrote laws protecting property. Courts refused to recognize Black families, and newspapers stayed silent. This silence shaped generations, because when a child is denied their truth, they grow up questioning their worth. And when millions are denied truth, a nation is built on denial. Enslaved communities, however, knew. They always knew. They recognized shared features, shared pain, shared stolen bloodlines. Stories were passed quietly, from grandmother to mother, from mother to child. Not as facts, but as warnings. Keep your head down. Don't draw attention. Survival is resistance. By the mid-1800s, entire Black families existed with no official surnames. Names changed with every sale. Identity was unstable by design, because people without identity are easier to control. This is why genealogy is painful for Black Americans. Records stop suddenly. Names vanish. Ages don't match. History breaks off right where slavery begins. The boy sold from Virginia could have ended up anywhere: a cotton field in Mississippi, a sugar plantation in Louisiana, a tobacco farm in the Carolinas, places where life expectancy was brutally short. If he survived, his children would inherit more than trauma. They would inherit silence. They would grow up knowing something was missing, but never knowing what. After the Civil War, slavery officially ended, but freedom came without justice. No land, no compensation, no accountability, and no answers. Formerly enslaved people searched for family. Newspaper ads appeared: looking for my son, searching for my mother, last seen before the war. Thousands of stories, most unanswered. Children born from hidden bloodlines now lived in a country that still refused to see them as equals. Jim Crow replaced chains. Segregation replaced plantations. The lie evolved, but it survived. And yet, truth has a way of resurfacing. In the 20th century, oral histories began to surface. Grandparents whispered secrets they had been told never to repeat. Family stories that didn't match official records. A white surname with no explanation. A photo that didn't fit. Then came DNA. Science did what history refused to do. It confirmed what Black communities had known all along: America's bloodlines are intertwined. Descendants of enslaved people began discovering white ancestors who never acknowledged them. Plantation owners, politicians, founding families, names carved into monuments, linked with blood to people they enslaved. This revelation unsettled the nation because it exposed the final truth. Slavery was not distant, it was personal. The boy from Virginia was not just a victim, he was a link between power and pain, between silence and truth, between the America that pretended and the America that existed. Every hidden child left descendants. Millions of Americans today carry DNA shaped by forced relationships, coerced silence, and stolen futures. This is Black history. Not just suffering, but survival. Not just loss, but endurance. Because despite everything, Black families rebuilt. They created culture, music, language, faith. They turned pain into strength and memory into resistance. But the question remains: what happens when a nation finally confronts the children it tried to erase?
By the mid-1800s, the lie was cracking. not loudly, not publicly, but in ways that could no longer be contained. The children slavery tried to erase were growing into adults who understood something dangerous. They had survived. Survival itself became an act of resistance. Every enslaved person who remembered a story, a name, a face, was defying a system built on forgetting. Across the South, whispers spread. Some enslaved people spoke quietly about bloodlines. They recognized features. They noticed patterns. They knew that the plantation system was lying. And lies weaken systems faster than violence ever could. Mixed-race enslaved people often found themselves in a dangerous middle ground, too black to be free, too white to be ignored. Plantation owners feared them because these individuals shattered the illusion of racial purity. Some were given slightly different roles: house servants, craftsmen, overseer assistants, not out of kindness, but out of fear. Closer supervision meant tighter control. Others were targeted, sold far away, worked harder, broken faster. The goal was always the same: remove the reminder. But even under this pressure, resistance grew. It didn't always look like rebellion. Sometimes it looked like literacy. Secret lessons at night, letters written in stolen moments, because reading meant access to truth. Sometimes resistance looked like religion. Black churches formed in secrecy. Not the version of Christianity taught by slaveholders, but one centered on liberation. Moses, not masters. Freedom, not obedience. And sometimes resistance looked like escape. The Underground Railroad was not just a network, it was a rejection of erasure. Every person who escaped carried proof that slavery was not natural. After emancipation in 1865, freedom arrived without repair. Chains were removed, but damage remained. Families searched for one another across states. Mothers who had hidden children now searched for adults. Children who had been sold returned to nothing. Freedom did not come with answers. Records were missing, names changed, histories destroyed. America moved on. Black families were told to do the same. But memory does not obey laws. Stories survived in kitchens, on porches, in lullabies. Fragments passed down, hints of truth. Reconstruction offered a brief moment of possibility. Black Americans voted, held office, built schools. But white backlash came quickly. Violence replaced law. Lynching replaced silence. And once again, black identity was punished. Mixed-race ancestry became another danger. Some tried to pass as white, not to escape blackness, but to survive racism. Passing meant cutting off family, erasing oneself, another form of disappearance. Others refused. They claimed black identity proudly, not because it was easy, but because it was honest. They built a culture from fragments: music, language, faith. A people reconstructed from what slavery could not steal. By the early 20th century, the Great Migration reshaped America. Millions of black Americans moved north and west, escaping terror, carrying stories, looking for dignity. In cities like Chicago, Detroit, Harlem, black culture flourished. Jazz, poetry, art, identity reclaimed. Yet the past lingered, unspoken, unresolved. White families rarely acknowledged their hidden relatives. Black families carried unanswered questions. History remained uneven. Then came the Civil Rights Movement, a reckoning. Black Americans demanded recognition, not just legally, but historically. They asked, who are we? Where did we come from? What was stolen? America struggled to answer, because the answer required confession. In recent decades, DNA testing has reopened buried truths. Families are discovering connections once denied. Some confront history, others resist it. But the evidence is undeniable. The hidden children of slavery are no longer silent. They live in millions of Americans today, in faces, in genes, in stories resurfacing. This is not about guilt, it is about truth, because reconciliation without truth is impossible. Black history is not separate from American history. It is American history, built into its foundations. The child hidden in 1802 did not disappear. He became generations.
Every nation carries a debt. Some debts are written in numbers, others are written in silence. America's greatest unpaid debt is not only slavery, but the generations of lives that were erased to protect a lie. The hidden children of slavery were not just denied freedom, they were denied acknowledgement, denied names, denied family, denied truth. And those denials didn't end with emancipation, they multiplied. For decades, America avoided the question, what happens when a nation is built on stolen labor and hidden bloodlines? The answer is visible everywhere, in inequality, in mistrust, in unresolved pain. Reparations is often reduced to a political argument, but before it is political, it is moral.
It asks whether a country can face what it did without turning away. The descendants of hidden children did not inherit wealth, they inherited disruption. Families broken apart, histories cut short, opportunities stolen before birth. Meanwhile, wealth built on slavery continued to grow, passed down quietly, protected by law, normalized as legacy. This imbalance did not correct itself, it calcified. Housing discrimination, redlining, employment exclusion, all modern echoes of plantation logic. Some argue the past is past, but the past is not finished. It lives in bank accounts, in neighborhoods, in schools, in who gets the benefit of the doubt. Acknowledgement is the first step, not apology without action, but recognition with responsibility. To say, this happened, it mattered, it shaped us. Truth-telling is not about blame, it is about clarity. A society that refuses to examine its foundation cannot repair what was built crooked. Across America, conversations are changing. Museums tell fuller stories. Historians speak more honestly. Families confront uncomfortable truths. This is not weakness, it is maturity. DNA has made denial impossible. The hidden children of slavery now have names, in test results, in family trees, in living people. The lie cannot hold. Some families reconcile, others resist. But resistance does not erase evidence. Justice does not mean punishment, it means repair. It means closing gaps created intentionally. It means investing where harm was done. The question is no longer what happened. The question is what will we do with the truth? Black history is not a sidebar, it is the spine of American history. To understand America, one must understand the children it tried to hide. This is not about reopening wounds. The wounds never closed. This is about healing correctly, with honesty, not denial. The hidden child born in 1802 never had a voice, but his descendants do. They speak through scholarship, through art, through protest, through memory. Every time the truth is told, a little of the debt is paid. This series is not an ending, it is an invitation to listen, to learn, to acknowledge. Because a nation that confronts its past can finally choose its future.
Oppression always creates resistance, even when history pretends it doesn't. For every system built to erase Black lives, there were Black minds planning survival, Black hands building alternatives, and Black voices refusing silence. Resistance did not begin with marches or speeches. It began in whispers, in stolen moments, in hidden lessons, in choices made under threat of death. On plantations, resistance often looked invisible. Slaves slowed their labor. They broke tools by accident. They passed warnings through songs. This was not weakness, it was strategy. Music became a weapon. Spirituals carried instructions. Lyrics mapped escape routes. Melodies disguised rebellion. Slaveholders heard faith. The enslaved heard freedom. Education was another battlefield. Teaching an enslaved person to read was illegal in many states. Why? Because literacy breaks control. A person who can read contracts can understand exploitation. A person who can write can preserve truth. So education went underground. Children learned letters in dirt. Adults memorized passages. Knowledge moved mouth to ear. Every lesson was an act of defiance. Some resistance was quieter. Families held on to names, stories, lineage. Even when surnames were stolen, identities survived orally. This mattered, because people who remember who they are harder to erase. But resistance was not always hidden. Sometimes it exploded. Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831 shook the South to its core. Turner was literate, religious, unapologetic. His revolt terrified slaveholders, not because of its scale, but because of what it represented: enslaved people thinking, organizing, striking back. The response was brutal. Executions, new laws, more restrictions. But fear lingered. Slaveholders understood something then. Slavery was unstable. Resistance crossed borders. Harriet Tubman didn't just escape slavery, she returned to it again and again and again. Each trip south was a direct challenge to the idea that Black people were powerless. She didn't ask permission, she took people with her. The Underground Railroad was not spontaneous, it was coordinated. Black and white abolitionists, free Black communities, secret routes, a network built on trust in a world designed to destroy it. Resistance also happened on paper. Frederick Douglass weaponized truth. He spoke clearly, relentlessly. He forced America to confront what it claimed not to see. His words dismantled lies that violence alone could not. After emancipation, resistance evolved. Freedom was fragile. Black Americans understood this quickly, so they organized. Schools were built. Churches became community centers. Newspapers documented truth when mainstream media refused. Reconstruction was not chaos, it was possibility. For a brief moment, Black Americans held political power. They voted, they served in government, they shaped laws. This terrified those invested in white supremacy. The backlash was swift. Violence replaced legislation. The Ku Klux Klan enforced fear. Jim Crow laws legalized inequality. Resistance was punished, but it did not disappear. It adapted. Black colleges and universities emerged. They trained teachers, lawyers, leaders. Education became long-term resistance. The early 20th century brought new movements. Marcus Garvey spoke of self-determination. The Harlem Renaissance redefined Black identity. Art, poetry, music, all acts of reclamation. Jazz was rebellion. Improvisation itself was a statement. We will not be confined. Resistance took intellectual form. Scholars challenged racist science. Writers challenged distorted history. Black thinkers documented truths the nation refused to archive. Then came war. Black soldiers fought abroad for freedoms denied at home. They returned, unwilling to accept silence. Resistance became louder. The civil rights movement was not sudden. It was inherited, built on generations of quiet courage. When Rosa Parks refused her seat, she was not tired, she was deliberate. Marches were organized, boycotts sustained, legal battles fought. Resistance became public. But even then, the struggle was not just for rights, it was for recognition, for history, for acknowledgement of stolen bloodlines, hidden children, and erased truths. Resistance is not always victory. Sometimes it is survival. Sometimes it is memory. Sometimes it is simply refusing to disappear. The hidden children of slavery did not all rebel openly, but they lived, and living was defiance.
Resistance did not end with emancipation. It changed shape. When chains were removed, systems replaced them. And Black Americans learned, again, that freedom without protection is fragile. The civil rights movement is often remembered through its victories, laws passed, speeches delivered, photographs framed. But resistance was never clean. It was dangerous. It required ordinary people to risk everything for the right to exist with dignity. In the 1950s and 1960s, Black Americans challenged segregation head-on, not because they believed America was ready, but because waiting had already cost too much. Children walked into schools surrounded by hate. Parents stood outside workplaces demanding equal pay. Students sat at lunch counters while insults and violence rained down. This was not symbolic. This was survival. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke of nonviolence not as weakness, but as moral exposure. Nonviolence forced America to see itself clearly. The brutality was no longer hidden. But nonviolence did not mean passivity. It required discipline, courage, and an understanding that resistance takes many forms. At the same time, other voices emerged. Malcolm X rejected the idea that Black people needed permission to defend themselves. He spoke to anger, to frustration, to generations exhausted by patience. These differences were not contradictions, they were reflections of the same unresolved pain. Different strategies for the same truth. Black lives had been devalued for centuries. As laws changed, systems adapted. Redlining replaced segregation. Mass incarceration replaced overt control. Economic exclusion replaced open denial. Resistance had to evolve again. By the late 20th century, Black communities faced new battles. The war on drugs devastated neighborhoods. Police violence escalated. Poverty was criminalized. History repeated, with new language. But memory remained. The descendants of hidden children recognized the pattern. They had seen it before. Hip-hop emerged as a modern form of resistance. Lyrics documented reality when institutions refused to listen. It was raw, unfiltered, unapologetic. Once again, Black voices told the truth in a language the world could not ignore. In the 21st century, technology changed resistance. Cameras replaced whispers.
What had once been denied was now recorded. Videos exposed violence that had always existed. The difference was visibility. Names became movements. Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. Each name carried history, not isolated incidents, but evidence of a system that never fully confronted its past. Black Lives Matter did not appear from nowhere. It rose from centuries of erasure, from hidden children, from stolen futures, from promises repeatedly broken. The phrase itself became controversial, not because it was radical, but because it was honest. To say Black Lives Matter forced America to confront how often they had not. Resistance today is multi-layered. It exists in protest and policy, in art and scholarship, in classrooms and courtrooms. Young activists carry history even when they don't know every detail. They feel it. DNA connects past to present. Trauma is inherited. So is resilience. Modern resistance is not just about reaction. It is about reclamation, reclaiming narrative, reclaiming memory, reclaiming dignity. There is pushback. There always is. Some call it division, others call it discomfort. But discomfort is not injustice. Avoidance is. History does not ask permission to resurface. It demands reckoning. The hidden children of slavery were never meant to be remembered, but their descendants refuse silence. They research, they document, they speak. Resistance now includes truth-telling, museums correcting narratives, books challenging myths, conversations long avoided. This is resistance too. America stands at a crossroads, not between past and future, but between denial and responsibility. Resistance does not promise comfort, it promises change. Slow, uneven, necessary. Every generation faces a choice: repeat the lie or confront the truth. The resistance you see today is not new, it is inherited. It carries the DNA of every enslaved person who survived long enough to pass something forward. The child hidden in 1802 did not vanish. He resisted by living. His descendants resist by remembering. In the final chapter of this series, we will ask one last question. What does healing look like after generations of erasure? And can a nation finally tell the truth about itself?
After resistance comes a harder question, not how to fight, but how to heal. For generations, Black Americans were forced to survive first and process later. Pain was postponed. Grief was delayed. Truth was buried under urgency. But healing does not disappear just because it is ignored. It waits. The end of slavery did not come with counseling. There were no apologies, no national pause, no collective mourning. People were told to move on without being allowed to understand what had been taken from them. Families rebuilt with missing pieces. Parents raised children without knowing their own grandparents. Last names were chosen, not inherited. History began mid-sentence. This created a unique kind of trauma, not just individual pain, but intergenerational trauma, passed down through behavior, through fear, through silence. Many Black families developed survival habits that outsiders misunderstood: emotional restraint, hypervigilance, distrust of institutions. These were not flaws, they were adaptations. The hidden children of slavery did not only lose freedom, they lost continuity. And continuity is how identity stabilizes. Healing requires knowing where you come from. But for millions of Black Americans, that knowledge was deliberately destroyed. So healing had to take another form. Community became medicine. Churches were not just religious spaces, they were emotional shelters, places where pain could be named, even if indirectly. Songs mourned what words could not. Music carried grief forward. Blues expressed loss. Jazz transformed struggle into creativity. Gospel turned suffering into hope. These were not genres, they were healing tools. Storytelling became survival. Grandparents told children what they knew, and sometimes what they guessed. Even incomplete stories were better than none. By the mid-20th century, Black scholars began naming the damage. They studied trauma, memory, identity disruption. They argued that slavery's harm did not end in 1865. It multiplied. But acknowledgement met resistance. America preferred narratives of progress. Healing required slowing down, facing discomfort, listening. Psychology often ignored Black experience. Therapy models assumed stable family histories. They did not account for forced separation, systematic erasure, or inherited fear. So Black communities created their own frameworks: healing circles, faith-based counseling, cultural affirmation. Care adapted where systems failed. Still, something remained unresolved: the question of truth. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, genealogy became a form of healing. Archives reopened, records digitized, DNA testing emerged. Suddenly, the silence cracked. People found connections across continents. African regions once unknown became personal. European ancestry surfaced, confirming long-whispered truths. These discoveries were complex. Healing is rarely simple. Some felt relief, others felt anger. Both were valid. Truth can heal, but it can also reopen wounds. For many, learning their ancestry was the first time history felt personal, not abstract. Slavery was no longer a chapter. It was family. White Americans encountered healing differently. Some felt guilt, others denial. But healing requires responsibility, not shame. Acknowledgement is not punishment. It is honesty. The hardest part of healing is letting go of myths. The myth of innocence, the myth of distance, the myth that time alone fixes harm. Healing is not forgetting, it is integration, making room for the full story without letting it define the future alone. For Black Americans, healing does not mean erasing anger. Anger can be informative. It points to unresolved injustice. But healing also means reclaiming joy, celebrating survival, creativity, love. Black history is not only pain. It is brilliance under pressure. Art, fashion, language, humor, all carry resilience. These are not distractions from trauma. They are responses to it. You cannot steal a people's future without trying to steal their imagination. That attempt failed. Today, healing looks like choice. Choosing to remember, choosing to research, choosing to speak, choosing to define identity beyond what was imposed. Healing also looks like rest. Refusing constant struggle, rejecting the idea that worth must be earned through suffering. The hidden children of slavery were denied rest. Their descendants are learning to claim it. This process is unfinished. Healing is not linear. Some days reopen old pain. Other days bring clarity. Both are part of repair.
Healing eventually leads to a question that has no easy answer. Can forgiveness exist without accountability? And can reconciliation happen without truth? For generations, Black Americans were told to forgive. Forgive slavery. Forgive segregation. Forgive violence. Forgive silence. Forgiveness was often demanded before acknowledgement was offered. That is not healing. That is avoidance. True forgiveness is not forgetting. It is not excusing harm. It is a choice that comes after truth, not before it. The hidden children of slavery were never given the chance to forgive. They were never asked what they lost. Their descendants inherited that unfinished work. Accountability is uncomfortable because it disrupts inherited innocence. It asks difficult questions. Who benefited? Who still benefits? Who paid the price? In America, accountability has often been reframed as blame. But accountability is not accusation. It is responsibility. A nation cannot mature without owning its history. Reconciliation is not symbolic, it is structural. It requires more than apologies or commemorations. It requires change where harm was done. For Black communities, reconciliation begins internally, with permission to feel anger without being labeled dangerous, with permission to grieve without being told to move on. Forgiveness cannot be rushed, and it cannot be forced. Some wounds need recognition before they can even be named. Many descendants of enslaved people struggle with this balance. They want peace without erasing pain. They want unity without denial. White Americans confront reconciliation differently. Some feel defensive, others feel overwhelmed. But discomfort is not injustice. Silence is. Reconciliation does not mean every individual is guilty. It means the system was. And systems are maintained through collective participation. Truth-telling is the foundation. Without it, reconciliation becomes performance, words without repair. Countries that have faced historical violence have learned this lesson. Truth commissions, public acknowledgement, education reform. Healing begins when the story is complete. In America, the story is still fragmented. Slavery is often taught briefly, its aftermath barely discussed. the hidden children rarely mentioned. This absence is not neutral. It shapes perception. It allows myths to survive. Forgiveness asked without education becomes manipulation. Reconciliation without memory becomes erasure. Some Black Americans choose forgiveness, others do not. Both choices are valid. Forgiveness is personal. Justice is collective. The pressure to forgive often falls only on the harmed. That imbalance repeats the original injustice. Reconciliation requires listening without defensiveness. It requires learning without excuses. It requires sitting with discomfort long enough for understanding to grow. The hidden children of slavery are no longer invisible. They exist in DNA, in scholarship, in public memory. They challenge the nation to grow up. Healing also requires boundaries. Reconciliation does not mean accepting continued harm. It does not mean silence. It does not mean forgetting. Forgiveness, when chosen freely, can be powerful, but it is not a requirement for justice. America often asks, why can't we move on? But movement without direction leads nowhere. The question is not whether the past should matter. It already does. The question is whether the truth will be faced deliberately or forced into the open by conflict. Reconciliation is slow. It happens in classrooms, in families, in conversations that feel unfinished. It happens when history books expand, when museums tell fuller stories, when silence loses its power. For descendants of hidden children, reconciliation begins with visibility, with saying, we were here, we mattered, we still do. Forgiveness, when it comes, should be honored, but it should never be demanded as proof of progress. The goal is not comfort, the goal is honesty. Healing does not erase history, it integrates it. It allows a nation to tell the truth without collapsing under it. The children hidden in slavery were denied dignity. Reconciliation is the work of restoring it, not retroactively, but forward. This chapter does not end with resolution, because healing is ongoing, but it does offer clarity.
Every nation builds monuments, but monuments do more than decorate public space. They teach. They instruct the future on who mattered and who did not. Memory is not neutral. It is chosen. For decades across America, statues of enslavers, generals, and plantation defenders stood tall. They were not placed there by accident. Most were erected long after slavery ended, during moments of Black resistance. They were warnings disguised as history. To walk past these monuments was to receive a message. Power remembers itself. Meanwhile, the stories of the enslaved had no statues, no plaques, no public mourning. Their suffering existed only in private memory. This imbalance shaped national consciousness. What is honored feels legitimate. What is absent feels insignificant. The hidden children of slavery were erased twice, once in life, again in memory. Public history followed a pattern. Museums displayed artifacts without naming the people behind them. Plantation tours focused on architecture, not brutality. Pain was aestheticized. Visitors learned about furniture, not forced reproduction, about crops, not stolen childhoods. This was not ignorance, it was design. Media reinforced the distortion. Films portrayed enslaved people as passive or grateful. Violence was minimized, resistance was criminalized. These images shaped imagination. For many Americans, Hollywood became history. But memory has a way of resurfacing. It presses against silence. In the late 20th century, artists, historians, and activists began challenging public narratives. They asked dangerous questions. Who built this nation? Who paid the price? Grassroots memorials appeared, names read aloud, candles lit, unmarked graves acknowledged. The fight was not about destroying history. It was about expanding it. When movements called for the removal of Confederate monuments, the backlash was immediate. Erasing history, critics said. But history does not live in statues. It lives in records, in truth, in accountability. Statues honor. Archives explain. These are not the same. A monument to oppression is not education. It is endorsement. As monuments fell, new spaces emerged. The National Museum of African American History and Culture changed the landscape. It told the story from captivity to creativity. Visitors encountered shackles alongside achievements.
pain alongside brilliance, history as a continuum. For many, it was overwhelming. For others, validating. For some, threatening. Why? Because full memory disrupts myths. Public memory also lives in media, documentaries, podcasts, digital archives, social platforms. For the first time, Black historians could bypass gatekeepers. They told stories directly. Names once buried re-entered consciousness. DNA technology revealed what records concealed. Family histories reconnected. Hidden lineages surfaced. The past spoke back. This democratization of memory shifted power, but it also triggered resistance. Some states restricted curricula. Some defunded museums. Some framed remembrance as political. But memory is not ideology, it is inheritance. Countries that suppress history do not heal, they fracture. The hidden children of slavery demand recognition, not for revenge, but for clarity. Without clarity, inequality appears accidental. With clarity, it becomes structural. Public memory shapes policy. What a nation remembers guides what it prioritizes. If suffering is forgotten, repair is postponed. If resilience is acknowledged, possibility expands. Black memory has always been preserved against the odds, through song, through oral history, through faith, through art. These were archives when institutions were closed. Today, memory is contested terrain. Whose stories get funding? Whose pain is acknowledged? Whose legacy is protected? The answer reveals power. Remembering slavery honestly forces uncomfortable questions about wealth, about inheritance, about justice. That discomfort is not a flaw, it is a signal. Healing requires exposure. Light reveals what silence protected. The hidden children of slavery are not ghosts of the past, they are ancestors of the present. Their absence shaped systems. Their recognition can reshape futures. Public memory is still evolving. More markers, more museums, more stories reclaimed. But progress is fragile. Memory can be reversed. Silence can return. That is why vigilance matters. History is not static. It is alive in classrooms, in streets, in screens. Every generation chooses what to carry forward. To remember fully is an act of courage.
Slavery did not end quietly, but its profits never ended at all. When people talk about slavery, they often focus on pain, the whips, the chains, the auctions. But slavery was not only cruelty, it was business, a massive, organized, highly profitable system that powered the American economy. For over 2 centuries, enslaved Africans were not paid wages. Their labor created wealth they were never allowed to claim. That wealth did not disappear, it accumulated. Plantations produced cotton, tobacco, sugar, and rice. Cotton alone became America's leading export by the mid-1800s. Wall Street banks financed it. Northern factories processed it. European markets consumed it. Slavery was not a Southern problem. It was a national engine. Every unpaid hour generated profit. Every stolen body produced capital. Enslaved people built infrastructure, roads, ports, rail lines. They cleared land that later became cities. When slavery ended in 1865, the question was simple. Who would own the wealth that slavery created? The answer was not the formerly enslaved. No compensation was paid for generations of stolen labor. No land redistribution followed. No economic repair. Instead, former enslavers kept their land, their tools, their capital, their political power. Black Americans left slavery with freedom on paper and poverty in reality. The promise of 40 acres and a mule was briefly discussed, then revoked. Land was returned to former Confederates. Opportunity was withdrawn. This decision shaped everything that followed. Without land, black families had no collateral. Without collateral, they had no credit. Without credit, they had no leverage. Sharecropping replaced slavery in all but name. Black laborers worked land they did not own. Debt kept them trapped. Contracts favored landowners. Escape was punished. Economically, the plantation system never fully ended. It adapted. Meanwhile, white families passed wealth forward. Land became inheritance. Inheritance became security. Security became opportunity. This is how generational wealth works, not through individual effort alone, but through accumulation over time. Black Americans were systematically excluded from this process. When the Industrial Revolution expanded jobs, black workers were often barred from skilled positions. Unions excluded them. Wages stayed low. When the New Deal expanded opportunity, black workers were left out. Domestic and agricultural labor, jobs held mostly by black Americans, were excluded from Social Security. This was policy, not accident. After World War II, the GI Bill transformed America. It funded education. It enabled home ownership. It created the middle class. But discrimination blocked black veterans. Banks denied loans. Colleges rejected applicants. Neighborhoods enforced segregation. White families bought homes that grew in value. Black families rented in areas denied investment. Home ownership is the largest source of generational wealth in America. Black Americans were locked out by redlining and racist lending. Maps marked black neighborhoods as hazardous. Investment vanished. Property values stagnated. These policies lasted decades. Their effects last generations. By the time legal discrimination ended, the gap was already vast. Wealth compounds. So does exclusion. Today, the racial wealth gap is not about work ethic. It is about history. The average white family holds many times more wealth than the average black family, not because of effort, but because of inheritance. This gap influences everything: education quality, health outcomes, business ownership, political influence. Wealth cushions risk. Without it, one setback becomes a crisis. Black families have long shown resilience. They built businesses. They created mutual aid networks. They supported one another when systems refused to. But resilience is not a substitute for repair. Economic inequality did not emerge naturally. It was engineered, maintained, defended. The echo children of slavery were born into an economy stacked against them, not by chance, by design. Understanding this changes the conversation. Poverty stops looking like failure. It starts looking like policy. Reparations are not charity. They are accounting. You cannot calculate profit without acknowledging cost. Ignoring economic history makes inequality seem mysterious. Knowing it makes inequality logical. This is why conversations about money are so uncomfortable. They expose responsibility.
History does not stay in the past. It moves. It adapts. It shows up wearing new clothes. The economic system built on slavery did not collapse in 1865. It evolved. The chains disappeared. The imbalance remained. Today, inequality often looks accidental, unfortunate, unrelated to history. But when examined closely, the patterns are unmistakable. Housing is one of the clearest examples. Where you live determines the quality of your schools, the safety of your streets, the value of your future. For decades, black families were denied mortgages. Banks refused loans. Neighborhoods enforced racial boundaries. This practice had a name: redlining. Government-backed maps labeled black neighborhoods as high risk. Investment fled. Property values stalled. White neighborhoods received loans, infrastructure, and growth. Black neighborhoods received neglect. This was not market behavior. It was policy. When homes in white neighborhoods gained value, families built equity. That equity funded college, businesses, and retirement. Black families were locked out of this engine. Even when discrimination ended on paper, the damage was already done. Today, black home ownership rates remain far lower than white rates. The wealth gap persists, not because black Americans do not want homes, but because the latter was removed. Education reflects the same pattern. Public schools are funded by local property taxes. Wealthy neighborhoods fund strong schools. Disinvested neighborhoods struggle. This means historical housing discrimination directly shapes educational outcomes. Students do not compete equally when their starting lines are different. Higher education followed a similar path. College costs rose. Student debt expanded. Families with wealth could assist. Families without wealth could not. Debt became the price of ambition. Black graduates often begin adult life owing more and owning less. This delays home ownership, business creation, and stability.
Employment outcomes show another layer. Studies repeatedly demonstrate that resumes with black-sounding names receive fewer callbacks than identical resumes with white-sounding names. This is not history. This is now. Even when hired, black workers are more likely to earn less and be passed over for promotion. The result? Less income, less savings, less generational transfer. Healthcare tells a similar story. Wealth determines access. Access determines outcomes. Black Americans experience higher rates of chronic illness, maternal mortality, and reduced life expectancy. These are not biological differences, they are economic consequences. Environmental exposure adds another layer. Polluting industries are more likely to be placed near black communities. Toxic air, unsafe water, long-term health costs. Again, not random. Policing and incarceration further amplify economic harm. Black Americans are arrested and incarcerated at higher rates. Criminal records reduce job access. Families lose income. Communities lose stability. Mass incarceration functions as economic extraction. Prisons do not create wealth, they remove it. All of this reinforces a cycle. Limited opportunity equals economic stress equals increased surveillance equals reduced opportunity. This cycle did not begin naturally. It traces back to slavery. When enslaved people were denied wages, they were denied wealth. When wealth was denied, inheritance disappeared. When inheritance disappeared, inequality multiplied. Some argue that time should have corrected this, but time only heals what is actively treated. Wealth compounds, so does disadvantage. Meanwhile, myths persist. That success is purely individual, that poverty is a personal failure, that the past no longer matters. These narratives protect comfort, they avoid accountability. But data tells another story. When black communities receive investment, outcomes improve, schools succeed, health improves, crime declines. This proves inequality is not cultural, it is structural. The hidden children of slavery were born into systems designed without them in mind. Their descendants navigate those systems today. Acknowledging this reality is not about blame, it is about responsibility. Economic justice does not mean equal outcomes, it means equal starting conditions. Programs that expand opportunity are often labeled unfair, but fairness assumes equality existed. It did not. Reparative policies aim to correct imbalance, not erase difference. This includes fair housing enforcement, student debt relief, targeted investment, living wages, healthcare access. These are not radical ideas, they are responses to historical extraction. Ignoring the past does not create unity, it creates confusion. Understanding the economic legacy of slavery clarifies modern America. It explains patterns, it removes myths. The goal is not to remain trapped in history. The goal is to learn from it. Because a system built on exploitation will continue to exploit unless consciously redesigned. The hidden children of slavery deserve more than remembrance. They deserve repair.
Oppression did not silence Black America. It sharpened it. From the moment freedom was denied, resistance was born. Not always loud, not always visible, but always present. Even in slavery, resistance took many forms. Learning to read in secret, preserving African languages and rhythms, passing down names and stories, refusing to forget. The hidden children of slavery were not only victims, they were witnesses, and witnesses remember. After emancipation, Black Americans moved quickly. They built schools before they had protection. They built churches before they had resources. They built communities before they had rights. Education became the first weapon, not for dominance, for survival. Teachers worked in dangerous conditions. Schools were burned. Students were threatened. Still, learning continued. Knowledge represented freedom that could not be auctioned. Black entrepreneurship followed. Small businesses emerged. Barbershops, grocery stores, insurance companies, banks. These were not luxuries, they were lifelines. In towns like Tulsa's Greenwood district, Black communities created wealth despite segregation, despite exclusion, despite hostility. That success was seen as a threat. Violence often followed prosperity, not because Black communities failed, but because they succeeded. The destruction of Black wealth was not accidental, it was corrective. Yet rebuilding followed again. Throughout the 20th century, Black Americans organized labor movements, civil rights campaigns, mutual aid networks. They understood something fundamental. Individual success could be erased. Collective power could not.
The civil rights movement was not spontaneous, it was strategic. It combined moral clarity with economic pressure. Boycotts targeted profits, marches targeted visibility, court cases targeted law. Young people led, women organized, churches mobilized. Victory was incomplete, but transformative. Legal barriers fell, opportunities widened. Still, resistance adapted. Jim Crow ended. Mass incarceration rose. Housing discrimination shifted form. The struggle did not disappear, it changed shape. Black resilience continued. Hip-hop became a voice. Art became protest. Sports became platform. Culture carried truth when institutions resisted it. Black journalists told stories others ignored. Black scholars documented patterns others denied. Black parents taught lessons not found in textbooks. This was education beyond schools. Community organizations filled gaps left by the state. Food programs, legal aid, health clinics. When systems failed, Black communities responded. This resilience was not romantic, it was necessary. Survival required creativity. Joy became resistance. Celebration became defiance. Even laughter held meaning. In the digital age, resistance entered new space. Social media bypassed gatekeepers. Videos exposed injustice. Stories traveled faster than denial. Movements formed globally. Local pain became global awareness. This visibility came at a cost. Backlash intensified. Narratives were questioned. Intentions were misrepresented. But silence was broken. Resilience does not mean accepting harm quietly. It means enduring while demanding change. Black Americans have always imagined futures beyond survival. They envisioned ownership, safety, dignity. Rebuilding is not just physical, it is psychological. Generations raised under pressure learn caution. Healing requires space to feel secure. This is why representation matters, why leadership matters, why visibility matters. When children see possibility, they pursue it. When they see limits, they internalize them. The hidden children of slavery were denied imagination. Their descendants reclaim it. Economic rebuilding follows cultural strength. Support Black businesses, invest locally, create ownership. Ownership changes leverage. Leverage changes outcomes. Political participation follows next. Voting, advocacy, policy influence. Change accelerates when voices are organized. Resilience is not endless. Communities should not have to endure forever. The goal is transformation, not survival. Resistance paved the way. Rebuilding secures the future. The story of Black America is not one of perpetual suffering. It is one of continual creation. Creation under constraint. Creation under pressure. Creation against odds. That creativity built America as much as labor did.
Truth does not destroy nations. Lies do. For generations, America avoided a full reckoning with its past, not because the truth was unknown, but because the cost of honesty felt too high. Slavery ended, but accountability never arrived. The hidden children of slavery did not ask for pity, they asked for recognition. Truth is the first form of repair. Without it, justice becomes impossible. Acknowledging history does not mean living in it forever. It means understanding how we arrived here. For too long, the story was simplified. Slavery happened. It ended. The nation moved on. But history is not a straight line. It leaves shadows. Those shadows appear in wealth gaps, in segregated neighborhoods, in unequal schools, in mistrust between communities. Repair begins when a society admits that damage was done. This is not unique to America. Other nations have faced their pasts. Germany confronted the Holocaust. South Africa confronted apartheid. Truth commissions were not perfect, but silence was no longer acceptable. America has yet to fully do this. Reparations are often misunderstood. They are not handouts. They are not charity. They are repair. When property is stolen, it is returned. When labor is unpaid, it is compensated. Slavery was the largest theft in American history. The question is not if repair is justified. The question is what repair should look like. Repair can take many forms: investment in education, fair housing access, healthcare equity, student debt relief, community ownership. These are not gifts, they are corrections. Justice does not mean punishing descendants. It means addressing inherited advantage and inherited harm. Some fear that acknowledging this history will divide the nation, but division already exists. Unity built on denial is fragile. Truth strengthens trust. The future of America depends on who controls the narrative. Will history be taught fully or selectively? Children are not harmed by truth, they are empowered by it. Understanding history does not weaken patriotism, it deepens it. A nation confident enough to face its past is strong enough to shape its future. The hidden children of slavery represent more than suffering. They represent unfinished business. Their legacy is not only pain, it is perseverance, creativity, vision. Black Americans have continuously imagined freedom, even when denied it. That imagination built movements, built culture, built progress. The future requires more than resilience. It requires redesign. Systems created under injustice must be rebuilt intentionally. Equality does not happen naturally. It must be constructed. This means policy choices, budget priorities, moral clarity. Repair is not a single action. It is a commitment to fairness over comfort, truth over tradition, justice over denial. America is not broken beyond repair, but it is unfinished. The story does not end with slavery. It does not end with civil rights. It does not end today. It continues with choice. What will be remembered? What will be corrected? What will be passed forward? The hidden children of slavery are not asking the future to look back in anger. They are asking it to look forward with honesty. Honesty creates possibility. When truth is acknowledged, healing begins. When healing begins, progress follows. This is not about rewriting history. It is about finally reading it. A future built on truth does not erase anyone's story. It includes everyone's. America's greatest strength has always been its ability to change. Change begins with recognition. The hidden children of slavery were denied names, denied protection, denied justice, but they were not erased. They live in records rediscovered, in stories reclaimed, in descendants demanding more. This series does not end their story, it opens it, because remembering is an act of respect, and justice begins where silence ends.